Hey there, this is Robert Kornacki, co-founder at Paima Studios. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Modular Gaming Rollup Stack and how it compares to the typical modular rollup stack, which you may have heard of in the rest of the OP, Optimism world, Celestia world, and in the entire L2 space, and how specifically the case of using sovereign rollups, or which you may have heard of pessimistic rollups, actually enables us for the gaming use case specifically to take new steps in the modularity aspect that actually provide great benefits for end users and players. So let's jump right in. So for those of you who may know, with typical rollups, you have the ability for them to be modular, where you have a settlement layer, which is typically the layer 1 blockchain that does the sequencing. Then you have on top of it a rollup, a layer 2, which typically commits to the layer 1 for the sequencing of the layer 2, and then you have a data availability component. And so the modularity comes from the fact that you can use something like Celestia or some other data availability layer to then post the actual data while you use the layer 1 for the sequencing. And so your layer 2 is execution, your layer 1 is sequencing, and your data availability layer is for keeping all that data always transparent, accessible, available. So that's the typical modular stack at its base. However, in the world of sovereign rollups, and specifically for gaming, and this is something that we're currently building out in Paima Engine, and I think we're the only people really building this out because there hasn't been much innovation in the world of sovereign rollups, besides a little bit in Urbit a year or two back, but primarily I think we're the predominant sovereign rollups that are being built overall. With Paima Engine and sovereign rollups as a whole, we actually get something that's really cool, which is data projection. So all rollups on blockchains on top of L1s natively have the ability to project data, right? So any layer 1 state that exists on the layer 1, you have the ability to read it into the layer 2. One of the really cool things about sovereign rollups is that they actually have kind of this robust facet where data projections for both optimistic and ZK rollups only allow you to project data from the layer 1 that's currently available in the blockchain state, the actual final state up to the latest block height. The reason for this is because these are both proof-based rollups, right? Where in the optimistic world, if there's something that happens, a fraud proof needs to be submitted that then can get executed optimistically, whichever way you do it, whether it's the full block batch or you find a specific opcode, doesn't really matter. But in either case, you need access to all of the data that was used and that was projected in the optimistic case or in the ZK case. Because in both cases, you have a prover that either executes or verifies the validity proof in the ZK case. And at the end of the day, in order for those proofs to be verified, the data that was submitted to create the proof needs to be accessible. And if the data isn't accessible, well, you can't validate the proof. What that limits you at the very first step, if from the perspective of what do data projections give you, that only allows you to read data for optimistic and ZK rollups from the latest blockchain state. That means, one level up, you can't read any history, right? Anything that existed in the past is inaccessible to an optimistic or ZK rollup from the perspective of data projections. But for sovereign rollups, and this is really one of the innovations that we're capitalizing on a lot in Paima Engine, and that's something that's completely unique to sovereign rollups, is that you're not strictly limited to the latest data that's on the blockchain in the latest state. You can actually, as a first step, access any of the historical states on the entire blockchain. And so that means, okay, you had a DEX that performed some sort of transaction, 500 blocks ago or, even 1 year ago. As long as that's part of the blockchain history, sovereign rollups can trustlessly, with no new security assumptions, project that data into the layer 2. Going one step further, That also means not only any historical data, but any data that has had computation on top can also be projected into the sovereign rollup. What this means also is that other rollups, right, where a rollup is effectively posting data that's being sequenced and then executed upon as a layer 2, that data technically, because it's sequenced on the chain, is actually available and can be projected. That means that something that's really unique with sovereign rollups is that technically a sovereign rollup, though this isn't, in practice, this can't scale infinitely into millions of rollups, but any sovereign rollup can read data trustlessly from any other rollup that exists and sequences on the same base chain, on the same layer 1. And so, for example, with Paima Engine, you can create a game that, say, it lives on Ethereum on the layer 1 level or on a layer 2 rollup, say on Optimism, right? It's deployed as a layer 3 on top of Optimism. This gives you this kind of modularity potential where theoretically you can even have, let's say in a ZK rollup, in ZK Sync or any ZK rollup, or let's say on top of Arbitrum. You deploy on top of Optimism as a layer 3 game, and you can read arbitrary state about some smart contract that lives in Arbitrum or in ZK Sync or whichever rollup you want. And this allows you a lot of benefits in terms of having a non-custodial nature between what happens in your game and where your assets actually live, right? Where in typical rollup world, in the world of optimistic and ZK rollups, typically everyone bridges all their assets, their NFTs, their tokens, everything into the rollup, and then it's used there natively. But with Paima Engine and this more sovereign rollup, projective rollup focus, we want to leave the assets on the layer that they're on, because these are blockchain ledgers that are geared specifically for the task of deciding ownership. But the gaming state machine, your layer 2 that's built with Paima Engine for your game, doesn't really need to have a full blockchain financial ledger implemented inside of it. And actually, it does much, much better for scaling, for parallelism, for being able to implement complex games and have really complex state for your games. All of this, when crammed into a ledger, doesn't really fit well. While if you separate this out, and this is the whole, approach of the modular stack for blockchains, you want specific pieces of the stack that explicitly are designed from the ground up for their use case. And that's what Paima Engine is for gaming. And so having this capability of projecting any data from any rollup that's committed to the same base chain is something that specifically is impossible for any other blockchain gaming engines that are built for using optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, or otherwise. But that's not all, and that's actually the really cool thing. So, as I said in the first place, the first type of projection, which all rollups support, is projecting data from the latest state of the underlying layer 1, right? The next step above that is projecting historical state from the underlying layer 1. The next step above that is projecting state from any rollup that's deployed on the layer 1, whether that's a layer 2, layer 3, arbitrarily, any point of the rollup stack, as long as they sequence to the same blockchain, that can work. And that's all, Paima Engine supports all of that. And it's the only gaming engine, to my knowledge, that does support that, because no one else is building in the world of sovereign rollups with projective capabilities. However, this can even go one step further. And this is a really cool thing that I'm excited to share with you guys, is that, as you may know, Paima Engine already supports cross-chain play because we support account abstraction inside of Paima Engine as a primitive. And this means, for example, whether you're using a EVM wallet, whether you're using a Polkadot wallet, whether you're using a Cardano wallet, and soon whether you're using an Algorand wallet, all these wallets are natively supported in the Paima Engine stack. And this means that I can deploy a game, say on a very low cost sidechain, such as Mokomba, such as Polygon, or otherwise, where it's extremely cheap and you can have really fast finalization times, and you get all these benefits that benefit gaming. However, one of the things you really want is that with gaming and with functionality like stateful NFTs, where you can have an NFT that keeps accruing state over time, one of the key things that players need is non-custodial rollups for their assets, where in optimistic and ZK fashion, users have to trust the layer 2 and move and take the minutes to move over the Arbitrum bridge, over the Optimism bridge, over the ZK bridge from the layer 1 to the layer 2. There's a lot of lag in time, but also a custodial nature where the assets that a user has, NFT fungible tokens, have to move into the layer 2. That's causing more liquidity problems because separating everything into their own rollups, and also causing delays, fees, and a lot of other negatives. And the worst case scenario where if the rollup blows up, the user can potentially lose all their funds because it's stuck on the layer 2. These are inherent traits that really aren't good at all from the perspective of gaming. And specifically, with what we're building out with cross-chain play, account abstraction, we already today allow anyone, as I said, from EVM wallets, Polkadot wallets, Cardano wallets, and soon Algorand wallets to play Paima Engine games and submit game inputs for any game created with Paima Engine. That's already baked in for free, it's just included, and that's really powerful. However, because we're in this sovereign rollup modular stack, we can actually go further. And this is what I was talking about with the modularity and why I brought in the different layers of projections, of data projections. So what's really cool here is that because we have account abstraction, because we've already implemented a bunch of these different signature schemes from all these different ecosystems, we now have the base where users can play from many different blockchains. However, the key part of blockchain gaming is having assets that are valuable, that interact and grow and develop while playing your games. So stateful NFTs are the first case, but also stuff where some games may want fungible tokens to be locked up, right? And then users get benefits for staking tokens on the blockchain, and then they get some in-game rewards, for example. Or taking part in a DAO vote on chain and having some benefits like an experience boost or something in game. All of these things, they really shine and flourish in the world where you can have data projections, and together with cross-chain play, what we're aiming for in the long term is to develop the sovereign rollup tech in Paima Engine, so that not only can you have this modular split of sequencing, of execution in our data availability layer, but in fact you can actually have data projections not just across rollups in the same ecosystem, which we already support pretty much today. There's like 2% extra UX that would have, or developer experience that we'd have to do to kind of hook all that up nicely. But what we're also aiming for, and this is something that we announced recently called projected NFTs, is that not only can you have NFTs and state from other rollups, but you can even have NFTs and state projected from entirely different blockchains that are fully sequencing separately. There are obviously limitations here, but what this means is that in this future, and with all this new technology that we're building in the sovereign rollup direction with Paima Engine, that's completely impossible for every gaming engine or other project that simply focuses on the typical optimistic or ZK stacks. With this sovereign rollup approach, it'll be possible, for example, to have your very high value NFT live on Ethereum L1. So you have very high security guarantees. It's very safe. You don't really have to trust almost anything. All you'd have to do is simply lock up that NFT in a very simple smart contract that doesn't allow almost anything except locking up and withdrawing. So super simple. It can be audited, it can be formally verified to be secure. And doing this simple lockup protocol allow that NFT to then be projected into a game that's deployed, say on Polygon, say on Milkomeda, say on whatever alternate sidechain, cheap layer 1 chain or otherwise that has, very fast finalization, very low transaction fees, and the ability to really get stuff up and running for cheap and fast, where you don't want the long term for extremely high value assets. You don't necessarily want your actual game assets to live there, but the actual submission of game moves and sequencing of them and the actual state that is generated from them, that stuff can live on these cheaper chains, while your very high value asset can live on Ethereum L1. And this effectively means that we have this really strong modularity past just the idea, oh, I can move my data availability to somewhere like Celestia. This actually means the valuable assets and the non-custodial nature of our sovereign rollups with projections in the Paima Engine world. What this means is we don't split just the data availability and the sequencing and the execution. We actually split where your assets and all your high value tokens and NFTs, where they live from the actual state attached to them. And so this is kind of a next step in true modularity. And in our case, with Paima Engine, the big focus is on games. This also applies to gamification, potentially to also accounts. So you have a very important NFT that lives, say, on Ethereum or Cardano or whatever your favorite blockchain is. But then the extra state on top of it, say you go to conferences and you want a rewards program, that can be applied in a completely separate chain that's completely separately sequenced, but the actual NFT itself lives on Ethereum, for example. Or any kinds of these schemes where you have the very high value assets, say you have your DAO tokens and you have a DAO that lives on Ethereum, right? And the DAO performs votes that then mutates how the game actually acts and the actual rules. Say the stats of a monster, right? The attack was 5 and now goes to 10. All of that can live on a very high security L1 that has really solid proof of stake and a system that has proven and is time tested to be very secure for your assets. We want to take advantage of all of that security, not add any new complex trust assumptions or crappier UX, or even the problems of, okay, you're on a layer 2, the sequencer went down, now what do, right? Some of these systems might have a theoretical pass for you to offboard off the rollup, but there's often a lot of restrictions and limitations for that and high transaction costs and otherwise, where it'd just be much easier if simply you own your assets, all your extremely high value assets stay on layer 1s that you personally trust, but then the games and the apps and the dApps themselves, so in our perspective with Paima Engine, primarily for games, but in my opinion, in the future, this sovereign rollup direction that we're the ones primarily pushing in today, I think will come around to actually having more use cases in the future with Paima Engine and probably with other different types of rollups, in 1, 2, 3 years' time as more people move into the sovereign direction and kind of explore in this world as well. Having this opportunity to actually separate and have modularity in the sense of where your assets are secured and how and the layer where you use those assets, and having that trustless nature, I think that is a part of the modular stack that no one is talking about today, because it really is in a different direction compared to the proof-based rollups of optimistic and ZK rollups. But I really do think, and this is why we're pushing hard for this direction with Paima Engine, that this is a very valuable approach. And as we've seen with a lot of hacks in blockchains, and even basic stuff like sequencers going down, there's a lot of merit to the idea of having very specific sovereign rollups with strong projective capabilities that then can take advantage of all of the benefits of your underlying layer 1. Your layer 1 is designed to be a financial ledger that determines ownership, that can do stuff like DAO votes, that has a lot of formally verified smart contracts, that has a lot of audited smart contracts. All of this infrastructure can remain on the layer 1 while using this sovereign L2 rollup to actually project the data you care about and then to have new data on top that's like your character, that's, you know, a mage that's level 56 with 3 pieces of equipment, all as different stateful NFTs that all come together, which live on the layer 1, but are projected, and the actual state attached to them live in a layer 2 that's even sequenced on a completely different chain that may even have data availability on a 3rd chain, right? This is where you can have a full modular stack where all of the state that you care about is all trustlessly generated, and it can even be, you know, checkpointed, snapshotted, and it can even be moved, you know, from one side chain to another, where, you know, you can have a DAO vote theoretically on Ethereum, right? That says, okay, we're sequencing and posting all the game inputs on Polygon, and, you know, Polygon, the prices are kind of got too high recently on their side chain. The finalization time is not fast enough. Maybe let's switch to a different chain, a different L1, to a different side chain, like Mocomet or otherwise. These are approaches where the DAO can live on the L1, the governance token can live on Ethereum L1, they can do this entire governance vote on the L1, and then because of that, they can decide and then switch based off of that, and even switch to a different chain, or switch how different stuff works, like the fee costs on the contract on the game that's deployed on Polygon. The L1 DAO vote on Ethereum can actually affect what the L2 game treats as a valid fee, for example, or changes, you know, the different in-game elements, or whatever you want. This modularity of the entire stack allows us to actually move forward from just separating the execution and data availability from the sequencing layer to actually moving to a more user-centric point of view, where we actually separate where user assets are held from where users are actually interacting. And Paima Engine today, to my knowledge, is the only game engine or Web3 and gamification engine for building games, for building autonomous worlds, for even building Web3 apps and dApps in this new sovereign rollup perspective with projected capabilities. This is really the next step in our point of view, and with Paima Engine, we're really excited to finally be getting to a point where, you know, we have the developer docs released recently. Paima Engine is starting to solidify and be used. We're releasing our second game, Wrath of the Jungle Tower Defense, with another game in the works, and we're also working with multiple companies. I think around 30 to 40 companies at this point have already signed on to start using Paima Engine. And we're really developing and growing this sovereign rollup space as we keep building out the tech towards this truly modular gaming rollup stack. So, suffice to say, I think everyone is extremely focused on ZK and optimistic rollups, and I think there's extreme amounts of value there for the financial use cases. However, I think for the gaming, gamification, autonomous world use cases, and also for some use cases where we want to use assets and perform computation that's globally sequenced, but doesn't need to specifically use that asset in a smart contract and transfer ownership, but I, as the owner of that asset, perform a bunch of stuff that interacts with other people who have assets. All of these use cases are not ideally taken advantage of in an optimistic and ZK rollup world because of high costs, lack of data projections, and this, you know, attachment typically to a blockchain ledger based virtual machine. With our approach of sovereign rollups, with projective capabilities and all of this direction, I really do think we will be seeing in the next few years more and more of this take off, because this is underexploited, and for the specific scenario where we want to build apps that real people use and meet their needs, there's actually a lot of benefits for end users from the non-custodial nature to also being able to make, you know, full-fledged complex games and Web3 apps using TypeScript, for example, which is what Paima Engine natively supports and streamlines the process of making this, you know, way faster to develop compared to, say, using Solidity or Plutus or other smart contract languages, and gives you all the benefits, as I mentioned in this video, of this completely Modular Gaming Rollup Stack. With that all said and done, if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave some comments, follow us on Twitter, join our Discord, and if you're interested in using Paima Engine to build your own game, to build your own Web3 apps that had this sovereign rollup, projective rollup capabilities, please get in contact with us. We have a contact form on our website, Discord, as I mentioned, DM us on Twitter or otherwise, and we're happy, to give people early access, really pushing to get it out and released, but we're really focused on making developer experience really solid and working with companies who are really excited about this tech to get it, fitting for their requirements for building the next generation of Web3 games. So if any of that interests you, please do get in contact with us. And for everyone else, thanks for watching and have a great day.